Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous. But let each one of you be alone, even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together. For the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow.
Good morning. This morning's Gospel reading is from John 13:30 to 35. After receiving a piece of bread, Jesus left. It was night. He said to his disciples, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Judeans, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." In this is the gospel of Christ.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. So Jesus is going away. You will look for me, and you will not see me. So he speaks about his absence, and then says, "A new commandment I give to you, love one another as I have loved you." And in a sense, what's being said is that the love that the followers of Jesus have for one another will be the presence of Christ in the world. Not in his person, but in the relationships of love that are shared by all those who follow him. We spoke last Sunday about the model of pastoral care that we have in this church, and it's important. But whatever model we have or may move to, what is more important is the relationships of love that are part of this community. That is the presence of Christ, the relationships of love that we share with each other. Love one another as I have loved you. What does it mean to love one another? There are so many things that could be said about that. One thing I want to say at the moment is this. So often when we see something that is troubling or someone is in pain, we think that someone else should be doing something about it. But if we love one another, we will dare to feel that other person's struggle down here. and we will know that we can do something about it. It may involve others as well, it often does. But it will mean I can take an initiative to love this person. I can do something about it. I can be part of the living presence of Christ in this community. We'll say more about that in a moment. But firstly, Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. How did Jesus love his disciples? And that's a question for you. Nicola has the microphone. How do you think Jesus loved his own disciples? Because that's the model.
I think part of it's what I'd call tough love. So he was very challenging to them about their behaviours and the way they interacted with other people.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. So there was a rigour and a passion to it. Thank you.
I always wondered about that because he never seemed to do anything particularly close, almost like the Khalil poem there. Don't get too close, in the physical sense, I assume. But I think it's right what Jeff just said. He, more than they did, probably knew what he was putting them into. And that was going to involve a lot of need for love.
Thank you, Richard. Because I knew I was going to ask you this question, in a moment I'll show you the answers I came up with to the question, but one of them is a big vision for life. And one scholar I'm reading at the moment, and I think this is a wonderful expression, said Jesus had a mesmerising vision. A mesmerising vision for life. And he threw his disciples into it. So he cared for them by pushing them into an enormous vision for life. Thank you, Richard. Other responses. How did Jesus love? Marge, hang on a tick, Marge. We'll just wait for the mic.
I think it was an empowering love.
An empowering.
Rather than taking over, he empowered them
Yes.
to move on.
Yes. So called out the best in them. I've been reading another reflection recently which is staying with me. The way you make people or you invite people to change is to help them to be born again to their own goodness. Help them to be born again to their own goodness. Empower them.
Small matter of washing the feet.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. That is another one of my answers. In John 13, which this gospel comes from, is the way John tells the story of the Last Supper, and the meal is not important. What is important is that he washed his disciples' feet. That's love. And that was something only a servant did. And do you remember that he comes to wash Peter's feet and he says, "No, you can't do that to me. I won't have that reversal of the hierarchy." And Jesus says, "If you won't let me wash your feet, you will have no part of me." So service that puts you on your knees. Herb. He cooked them breakfast. Yes, after the resurrection by the Sea of Galilee.
He taught them and encouraged them to look at the people on the fringes,
Yes.
not the ones who were the important people, but to look beyond that.
Absolutely.
I think we try and do that with our children.
Thank you, sir. Robert, you want to have another
the taking on of the moneylenders in the temple.
Taking on
The moneylenders in
the
the
moneylenders.
temple, yes.
Okay. So that, I think, ties in with what Sue said. A willingness to go to the fringe, to those who are struggling. Hang on, Robert, I hadn't finished. So I think these two things are together. Going to those that society disadvantages, and also going to the centre which structures that disadvantage and taking them on. And for that he would pay with his life. So challenging power and sitting with the powerless. David.
He loved them bravely.
He loved them bravely. Can you say some more about that, David?
I think his love was so great that if it was rejected, so too was he. But he never worried about rejection. He just loved them.
Okay, thank you. Some great responses. Multi-layered. And in fact, you've covered all of my answers. That I had down a mesmerising vision. Actually, maybe I can claim a new journey, though I think it's been caught up in what many of you have said. This vision was so big that they left behind what they knew to travel with him and learn on the road. And then foot washing, which we have mentioned. One other thing I want to say about loving one another. Recently, I met with a retired Uniting Church minister, and he bombarded me for about 15 minutes monologue, telling me how important it was to listen. And he used that analogy, which has been used often and should be thought of much more often. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen twice as much as you talk. And he elaborated on this at great length. And it reminded me that listening is fundamental, and it's also hard. We do not naturally listen. We naturally talk and expect others to listen. To love one another, we must take on the discipline of listening. And I have come to the conclusion it is a discipline. The pastoral carers, as I said earlier, met on Tuesday night, and my wife Phil ran a wonderful workshop on listening. And you have a copy of the sheet that she gave to the pastoral carers with all sorts of tips for listening. We had 2 very funny role plays where I was supposed to tell a story and Phil went out of her way not to listen. And watching it, you think, gee, I do that. I do that all the time. Listening is a discipline, and we are constrained by the love of Christ to take on that discipline that we might truly love one another. Now, on the back of that sheet, you have 3 little cameos. And I'm going to ask you to break up into 6 groups. And we have some leaders And the leaders are Sue Condy, Nicola Robinson, Lloyd Robinson, David Hodges, Margaret Edler, and myself. Now, I'm going to ask first that we get into those 6 groups, and then I'm going to issue just 1 or 2 more instructions. So the question is, in each of these cameos, how would you offer love to that person? So could we move into 6 groups? And could the leaders put their hands up so we know whom to gather around? All 3 cameos. I haven't got the sheet in front of me. What's the first cameo? Graham, the homeless man. Thank you. Actually, my group might do that because this is an actual story that I was involved in. And David, could you do that one first as well, Graham? And then just move on if you have time. But start with Graham, and we'll start with Graham. And the next story is Jan and Harry. Margaret, could you do Jan and Harry first? And Lloyd, could you do Jan and Harry first? And you'll do... Oh, Sue, can you do Donald and Linda? And Nicola. If you only do one story, that's fine. We haven't got very long. Port, backs, down the end. Nicola, do you have the mic?
Our group primary task was to evaluate scenario 1 with Graham, the homeless man.
Yes.
So it was decided that I think the first step would be actually to engage with him and talk to him and find out his situation, where, what led him to this position, try and, I think, ascertain his psychiatric state as to whether there's anything we can do or whether there's a more serious issue which needs referral to somebody else. If it looked okay, then it'd be, and there's no sort of threat to safety from engaging with this person, then it's a question of what we can actually do to help him in terms of offering, perhaps, finding out where he is sleeping. There may be some space in the church which we could offer. There may be some facilities in the church in terms of, his cleanliness, offering food to him. Some of our groups suggested inviting him home and feeding him there. And I think that was really the main thrust of our, a shower and bathing and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yep.
Great,
Yep.
Thank you, Peter. Nicola, Richard, would you just say briefly what you came up with in our group? Because we did the same situation.
We were talking about we were talking about the Graham episode, and one of the suggestions was that the essence of the exercise was how do we love this person, and one of the suggestions was we should speak to him when he's doing his shrines and offer to help with the shrines, asking him what each one represents. So that we might be able to make a contribution and learn more from the shrine and what it represents.
Great, thank you, Richard. Anyone else would like to comment on the other 2 scenarios?
So we did the second one, Jan and Harry, where the grandparents, their granddaughter had lost a child. And after sort of talking about the immediacy of things, we actually then explored the effect of this ongoing, that anniversaries tend to trigger the welling up of emotions again, and that it's not just the love around the actual event time, it's actually the ongoing and the continuation that will need to be done. So as the years go past, there'll be something will occur and the person will respond again and feel down and need support and love. So we were talking around that not just being a short-term assistance, is needing to continue over a longer period of time.
Thanks, Alison. Anniversaries are really important. Thank you. And could we just have one comment from the third scenario? Sue, thank you.
We were just aware that in the third scenario with the grandparents and the difficulty of access to the reception venue, that there are two others in this. I mean, there are the grandparents who are very concerned. We're just not sure whether grandchildren and brides are always as concerned about others, recognising it can be a selfish time. But we recognise that older people can sometimes be selfish in their needs as well. So it was really about communication and not being judgmental, right, and keeping the communication at a level and asking for help and just not making it into a big family feud. So right, it was communication.
Thank you. Communication is indescribably important in human relationship. And simply because we've said something and we know what we mean does not mean that it's been heard in the way we intended it. I can tell you that as a minister, that people sometimes tell me what I preached about, and I think, I know I wouldn't have said that. But that was what was heard. So there was something important for that person, but communication's utterly crucial. I'm struck too, and particularly in my group, by the fact that often when we are presented with situations, it's so helpful to talk with others about how best to engage that situation with love. So maybe we've struck on part of a model. Sharing each other's wisdom in learning how best to love others. Final comment, Desi.
You mean listening and communicating, or just communicating?
Communicating is speaking and listening.
I think it should be re-emphasized, right? Listening to the right.
Happy to underline listening. How many ears do you have? How many mouths do you have? One. Can I underline whatever model we have or come up with, the strength of the community is found in the love that we have for one another. It requires all of us. It is incumbent on each one of us to love and to be loved. So may it be. Thanks be to God. Amen.